My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Jesus, today is a feast which is, on the face of it, a bit of a strange one, to be quite frank. It's the feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica in Rome. And maybe for people that have no connection to the city of Rome, it seems a bit strange that we are celebrating this as a feast throughout the world. That in my own little parish church, in whatever angle or corner of the world, that we have this feast of a church in Rome. And at the end of the day, there's many churches in Rome, and many very beautiful churches in Rome, and yet this is one of at least two, if not three, feasts that's sort of celebrated throughout the world on this occasion. And we ask, isn't it a bit strange that we have a feast about a building? And how do we know what's the emotional connection that we have to that? Now, in some sense, I count myself quite fortunate, because whenever I was a student in the seminary in Rome, it was actually located within the parish of the Lateran Basilica. So the Lateran Basilica is a huge church. It's the cathedral church of the Pope in Rome. A little bit on the other side of the city from where the Vatican is, if you've been to Rome and seen that. You kind of walk up the hill just from the Colosseum, and it was built in what would have been the countryside in the 4th century. And what makes it important is that it's the first church that at least exists in the West, or I think throughout the world, as a purpose-built place where Christians could come and worship freely. And that's our emotional connection to it, which seems a bit strange, but that's our link to this majestic building there today. And at the front of that building, you have this kind of plaque carved into the marble that says Caput et Mater, that it's the head and the mother church of all the world. And as I said, for those years, whenever I was initially in Rome, that was not just the Lateran Basilica, but it was also our parish church. And in that sense, since the cathedral is the mother church of the diocese, and that the bishop is always the parish priest, essentially, of the cathedral, it was really nice, because it essentially meant that Pope Benedict was my parish priest. And I used to love, whenever I would come home on holidays from seminary, to speak to my parish priest from my home about my other parish priest, who was Pope Benedict. And so I could sort of compare and contrast these two parish churches, so to speak. The big parish church that was kind of the centre of all of the churches in Rome, and indeed, in a sense, in the world, and my own home parish church. Now, my home parish church is very dear and very emotionally present to me. It's not the most beautiful church in the world, let's say, and though it has some very nice and fine architectural features, people just might walk past it and not even think about going in. Whereas if you're standing outside the Lateran Basilica in Rome, it's very hard to pass, because it's absolutely ginormous, and it has been added to quite significantly in the over 1,000 years since a church initially stood on that site. But my own parish church, let's say, is kind of holds an emotional place for me. It's a place where I receive the sacraments. It's a place where I would always come back to from my holidays whenever I was on seminary breaks. It's a place where the people who I knew and loved had nourished me in my faith. And so whilst it mightn't be technically speaking, to a lot of people, a very beautiful building, it was beautiful to me, or it still is beautiful to me, because it has that sense or that connection to my faith and how my faith grew and developed. And so in a sense, my own parish church is like my head and my mother. But because this church in my own home parish is there to serve the people of that parish, you have to trace it back kind of historically, that initially there was a kind of a much larger parish that had to be subdivided because it became necessary, because there were so many Catholics living in that area. And you can trace all of this back, this whole thing of needing a place to worship, needing a place in order to gather for Mass, right back to the Lateran. And so this feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica reminds us of the connection that we have emotionally, let's speak, also to our history. And so if we can connect a little bit to our own home parish church, or the parish church in which we live, or the place, doesn't even have to be a parish, or the church where we go and we worship, where we pray, where we receive the sacraments, where Mass is celebrated, it all has a kind of like a connection to this church and the dedication of this church as a place set aside for worship. Now, it's good for us, I think, to reflect a little bit on the physical church buildings and how necessary they are, in fact, for the spread of the Christian faith. We need, as Catholics, to have a place in which we can gather and celebrate the sacraments. We need to have a place where we can invite other people as well to come and to adore Jesus. Maybe even something so simple as just to light a candle, or to say a prayer before a crucifix, or to invite somebody just to leave a petition before a statue of Our Lady. These are very, very important. Why? Because they are the dwelling places of God on earth. In the tabernacle is where you are really and truly present for us, Jesus. And I remember somebody telling me that in the last few weeks and days of his life, when the former prelate of Opus Dei, Don Javier, was dying in the hospital and he was no longer able to leave the hospital room, he told people that he was mentally visiting all of the tabernacles in the different centers of Opus Dei that he had visited throughout the world. In other words, he had this kind of beautiful connection of just thinking and imagining of all of these places of worship where you really and truly are dwelling and waiting for us, Jesus. And maybe that's a nice little thought for us, is that if we could think even just in this moment of what did the tabernacle look like in that church where you made your first communion, or what did the tabernacle look like in the church in which you got married in, or the church which had some special significance for you at some particular point in your life, the place where you went to university, maybe the university chaplaincy. What does the tabernacle look like? And if we can at least visit those places of your dwelling, Jesus, in our hearts, in our minds, then it does draw us back in our emotional sensitivity to the place of your dwelling. That we're not distinct from them. They're not just kind of buildings to us, but there's a reason for it which is connected to our faith. There's a reason for it that connects us to not just the gathering of people, but us actually to that physical place. And if it holds some significance for us, then we might just be able to remember it, and then to thank you that you're there for us, that you're dwelling there. Now, one of the gospel passages that we can read for this feast, it's the story of whenever you went in and cleansed the temple, Jesus, whenever you were so disgusted to see how the place of sacrifice and a place of worship in Jerusalem that stood as a kind of a testimony to where human beings could come closer to you, to God's dwelling on earth, that had been turned into some sort of marketplace. And so rightfully you showed the disciples and all of those who were gathered there what it means to have right worship, that it should be clean, that it should be a place where there is a singular devotion to our Heavenly Father, to God, and that we don't use and distort the church, or in this case the temple, as a place for our own means. And so if we want to think about the churches, or we want to think about the Lateran, or whatever church is in our mind, in our reflection as prayer, then it's also an invitation to us to see, well, how can I purify myself in order that I can worship freely there? That it's not just about the building being clean and free of encumbrances, but also my heart. One of the beautiful things about the Lateran Basilica, which is an absolutely massive church, is in the two side aisles that flank the main aisle, there are little wooden confession boxes that are almost like little life rafts at the edge of a boat. And many times whenever I was living in that parish, I was able to go there and to avail of the sacrament of reconciliation, to be to be purified by your grace in order that I could go to the altar to receive your body, blood, soul, and divinity. This is part of the purification which is also necessary in the church. That I, in my heart, am pure in so far as I can by confessing my sins in order to receive you, Jesus. And you offer us that life raft of the sacrament of confession in all of the churches of the world. So in our reflection upon the church as a physical place, we're also drawn ever closer to you in our worship. Jesus, as we celebrate this feast of the dedication of the Lateran, may we be called back to true worship, to the place of true worship, and to thank you for it, that you are here dwelling with us upon this earth and calling us to prayer, calling us to praise you. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations that you have communicated to me during this meditation. I ask your help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.